President's address yesterday. For more analysis of that State of the Union address, we're joined from Washington by James Brown, military analyst at the Lowy Institute and head of the US Studies Centre Alliance 21. James, thanks very much for your time this morning. There's lots to cover here. I just wanted to start by asking you what you thought was most remarkable about that State of the Union address.
Well, I guess as an Australian watching that speech, you're primarily looking for what Obama has to say about US foreign policy, but this was not a foreign policy speech. I thought the most remarkable aspect of this was that we have a president talking about the incredible resurgence of the US economy that's happened over the last few years. Not that long ago we were talking about America in decline, on its knees. I think Obama was right to be able to come quite proudly and point to just how much turnaround there's been in the domestic economy. But there wasn't a lot on Iraq. If you were looking for a sort of big articulation of the Iraq strategy or how the US plans to counter ISIS across the globe, there wasn't that. It's going to be more of the same, more of that sort of patient work to contain them and degrade and destroy them by rolling back their forces.
Well, it was interesting to see just basically how he's going to position himself for the last period, the last 2 years of his time in office. And really, as you mentioned, he was talking about the economy, middle class economics as well, and talking about some tax changes and really positioning himself there to move forward in that regard. How possible is it going to be for him to make those changes to that middle class?
Well, it's going to be really tricky with the Congress that he faces. He made a call for better politics, which he needs to make given that the Republicans have the majority. That call I don't think was heeded. Today it's been back to business as usual, some of the same sort of partisan sore points coming back up again. So I think this is an Obama who's trying to be a bit resolute as he looks at the final stretch of his presidency, who doesn't want to back down, who still wants to be able to outline his vision but is going to have some trouble executing it. So even on some of those issues that were captured in the grab you just played, it will be a tough slog for him to get authorisation for any of those measures. But some of them are interesting. The step to make college education free in community colleges is an interesting one. His push to change the tax burden that the middle class bear in the US, I think, will really appeal to the Democratic base.
He really didn't talk about compromise this time. He talked about maybe some political cooperation, but he wasn't flagging any compromise this time around. He's seen how that goes on big matters. How has that been received, him sort of wielding his authority, his potential veto powers as well?
Yeah, he was trying to display strength there, and in terms of not compromising, there was that moment during the speech where he said, you know, I've got no more campaigns to run. There was a bit of derision from some of his opponents in the Congress, and he said that's because, you know, I won the last two, and I think that's the sort of grim, tough Obama trying to maintain his legacy and trying to stare down a pretty hostile Congress to him, threatening to use the veto not only in the way you just saw in that grab, but also if he's passed any laws from Congress trying to impose more sanctions on Iran. That second point, I think, has been much discussed here today in Washington, and again, people breaking down on that point pretty much as you'd expect them to. Some saying we don't need 535 negotiators on the Iranian problem, others saying that, you know, the President needs to take the concerns that the Congress has about the progress of those Iran negotiations seriously.
So a couple of years ago he may have been preferred to have been seen as a peacemaker president and bringing an end to two different wars overseas for the United States, but the rise of ISIS or IS has put an end to that. What do you think was significant about the comments he made about IS and trying to quell that threat? He talked about cybersecurity as well.
Yeah, look, I think his comments on cybersecurity have been much more compelling than his comments on ISIS. You know, there he's laid out just how important cybersecurity is over the last week with a series of announcements and a series of talking points. On ISIS, there hasn't been quite the same level of coordination. We will probably see more of this next month when he gathers world leaders to have a conference on countering extremist violence. But there's a bit of uncertainty, I think, certainly amongst Australians and amongst Australians who follow military strategic matters about just where this is going. There doesn't seem to have been a lot of progress despite the fact that more than 2,000 airstrikes have been conducted over Iraq and Syria. The flow of people in to train the Iraqi army has been quite slow. Obama didn't want to talk about any of that last night. He did want to make pains to show that he's not the kind of guy to go rushing off on another military adventure. But I think for people who want firm American leadership and a description of how this ISIS problem ends, they would have been a bit unsatisfied by the speech last night.
Now, the speech to the American people, I wonder how that might be received insofar as there's the next presidential election is not too far away. For Democrats and Republicans, will they now have to talk about the economics of inequality, whether they like it or not, because the people have heard Barack Obama speaking about that last night?
Well, I think that's always going to be a feature of a US presidential campaign. We know the problems in the US with income inequality. We know just how vicious some of the debates in Congress about taxation can get. That will certainly be a part of the next election. But it's not long now till we'll start to see candidates announcing themselves for a city that seems to be perpetually focused on the next election. It's very clear that people are starting to think about that now. The groups that support policy work for the Republican Democrat candidates for the presidential election are busily working away. People are starting to retire from their jobs, position themselves to come out with their preferred candidate. So a lot of people here are thinking about 2016 already.
And James, just finally, the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop made a speech just a short time ago. Did you pick up anything of significance out of that?
Look, she gave a pretty wide-ranging speech at the Alliance 21 conference here in Washington before a big audience at the Brookings Institution. She was really focused on trying to make people aware of just how fragile the international system that we all take for granted is. She spent a lot of time talking about sub-state groups, not only terrorist groups, but and ISIS. But she also talked about drug cartels, hackers, all the kind of threats that that our national security agencies are dealing with. We know she spent time yesterday with some of the security and intelligence chiefs here in Washington DC, so it's very much front of mind. And she made an interesting reflection. She said, a year ago I came here and all everybody wanted to talk about was Edward Snowden and the balance of privacy versus security. And in a year, with all the events we've seen and all the emergencies we've seen, the balance has really shifted from being overly concerned with privacy to really thinking about how we can help authorities and countries track these groups and keep us safe. So that was an interesting reflection on how things have changed in the past 12 months of her job.
James Brown, thanks very much for your time this morning. I hope you've got a big coat and maybe a rain jacket to go over the top of that as well.
Back out into the snow.
Good on you. Thanks, mate.
Just in case you thought that was a fake winter scene coming from Washington, that is heavy snow. It's apparently at its peak. It's about 2:45 in the afternoon Washington time, and it's apparently at its worst. They're expecting 2 to 3 inches to fall. So
looked like fun.
Nice and freezing,
not
lovely.
so much when you're out in it.
No.